Hello, welcome back to this physics breakdown of Dark Souls 2. Now that we've learned about both horizontal and vertical motion, it's time to combine them. In this video we're going to describe projectile motion. That's when an object is thrown or launched into midair while being pulled down by gravity. Once a projectile is entirely in midair, we can see its direction and velocity change throughout its flight. But how can we describe the motion of the object now? It doesn't just move sideways or fall straight down like we studied before. Now that we're dealing with motion in two dimensions at the same time, we can make this easier by breaking this problem down into two pieces. These pieces will be its horizontal and vertical components, also called X and Y components. These correspond to the projectile moving forward or backward and up or down relative to the player. We'll consider away from the player and upward as the positive X and Y directions respectively. Toward the player and downward will be the negative X and Y directions. Since there's no observable curve left or right in trajectories, we only need to consider these two dimensions of space. That leaves us with another question though. How do we find how projectiles move in each of these dimensions? Going to a free body diagram of a projectile, we'll examine what forces are acting on it. Since the object isn't floating in deep space, we know gravity is pulling it down. And for simplicity, we'll assume air resistance is negligible. And, since the object is moving forward, there's a force pushing it forward, right? Wrong! According to Newton's second law, a force equals mass times acceleration, meaning mass times a change in velocity. A force acted to accelerate the projectile up to speed, but once it was released, only gravity continued to change this velocity. This state of being acted on by gravity alone is called free fall. Since gravity only acts in the negative y direction, this means the object's vertical velocity is changing, but its horizontal velocity remains constant its whole flight. That means we can find horizontal velocity from a simple distance divided by time calculation. And we can find that using the Iron Keep Bridge again. By running across this far section of the bridge, we find it is about 12.7 meters long by counting the number of steps to cross it. Each of the about 6 2/3 panels is then 1.91 meters long. When throwing objects, I can aim with binoculars or a crossbow, letting me align with height or distance markers in the environment so that I throw horizontally. This lets me remove angles from my calculations since they were really tough to see with this camera. I started counting time the frame right after the object leaves the player's hand as well. While testing, I noticed three general categories for thrown objects based on their movement patterns. 1. Heavy objects, like lightning urns, corrosive urns, and so on. 2. Medium objects, such as holy water urns, fireballs, and so on. And 3. Light objects, meaning all throwing knives. I'll continue for now using a holy water urn as an example. Throwing from the square platform in the middle of the bridge, we see a holy water urn hits the bridge 4.5 panels away after 0.9 seconds. So it has a horizontal velocity of 9.53 meters per second, or 21.3 miles per hour. This comes in at about 1/4 the speed of an average MLB fastball, so we're well within normal human abilities here. This makes sense, especially since the object isn't designed to be as aerodynamic or easy to throw as a baseball. So the vertical velocity for the urn will be changing though, so it'll take a bit more work to find. We've done this type of calculation before though. In the last video on vertical motion, we used this kinematic equation to find vertical velocity, v equals v0 plus a times t. If I aim parallel to the ground, there won't be any initial vertical velocity, so v0 equals 0. And we have the same equation we used in the last video. Through a slight mishap, I noticed thrown objects seem to fall slower than the player does. So, I better take a detour to figure out what their acceleration really is. As the GPS says, recalculating. Since we have a ladder from the lower to the upper platform, we can find the distance between them to be 3.4 meters. Also, objects tend to be thrown from about player height, which adds another 1.7 meters. Then, throwing a holy water urn takes 1.25 seconds for it to hit the lower platform. Using the simplified equation, a equals 2h divided by t squared, to find the acceleration, we see it's negative 6.53 meters per second squared. Well, that explains the fall time discrepancy. It accelerated at less than half the rate the player did. With this acceleration value, now we can find the urn's vertical velocity. Going back to the simplified equation, v equals a times t, we see the vertical velocity on impact should be negative 8.16 meters per second. To find the holy water urn's total velocity right before impact, we combine the vertical and horizontal velocity components using the Pythagorean theorem. By this theorem, we know that the square of the diagonal side of the triangle, the hypotenuse, equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. In other words, an object's changing velocity diagonally can be found by examining its horizontal and vertical components by themselves and then combining them. To finish off this example, we have a horizontal velocity of 9.32 meters per second and a vertical velocity just before impact of negative 8.16 meters per second. Squaring each of these, adding them together, and taking the square root, we see the urn is moving at 12.5 meters per second or 28 miles per hour just before it hits the ground. Again, quite reasonable even with the added speed from falling. I can see why the developers decided on a lower speed like this. If all projectiles went at maximum realistic speeds, players would have way less time to react. This would make some already challenging sections of the game much more difficult. Not to mention projectile attacks would be even more powerful and probably throw off the game's balance and variety. And where would the fun be in that? While we're here, I'd like to check if the acceleration is different for each type of thrown object. The player's acceleration was different, so it could be helpful to make sure light, medium, and heavy objects all fall at the same rate. Okay, so throwing knives, light objects, hit the ground after an average of 1.93 seconds. Medium objects take 1.25 seconds, and heavy objects take 1.2 seconds after reaching the peak of their throwing arc. This gives average accelerations of negative 2.73, negative 6.35, and negative 7.42 meters per second squared respectively. Well, this is quite unlike what would happen in real life, where they'd all fall at nearly indistinguishable rates. Why might the developers have programmed them this way? A few other tests back at the bridge show us some more details. Medium and heavy objects had short range, slow speed, and somewhat short flight time. And throwing knives had long range and high speed with a longer flight time. As expected, throwing knives are quick and versatile, but they don't deal as much damage, while heavier objects have more limited movement, likely to balance their higher damage and make them require a bit more commitment to use. Pretty cool, huh? Thank you for watching this physics breakdown of Dark Souls 2. In the next video, I'll be going over rotational motion. Strap yourselves in, this next one's gonna be fun. If you like this video, please leave a like, and if you'd like to see more videos like this involving math, physics, and video games, feel free to subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks again! Since summoning fireballs is a form of magic in this game, I cannot explain why fireballs fall similarly to other thrown objects. Why they do is anybody's guess.